You're listening to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, your home for holistic, evidence-based cognitive enhancement strategies. And now your host, Eric Levi.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, where we discuss using nootropics, biohacking, and nutrition to help you boost your cognition. My name is Eric. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner. And today on the podcast, I have Mark Young, who is the CEO of Zona Plus and Zona Health, also a lifelong entrepreneur. Now, before I jump into the podcast, I just want to give a quick shout out to a new partner of the Holistic Nootropics Podcast. That is the Biohacking Congress. This is a pretty dope biohacking conference going on in October in Miami, October 16th and 17th. And actually, our guest Mark is going to be a speaker there at the Biohacking Congress. And we actually have a pretty cool partnership with these guys. They've actually hooked us up with a bunch of discounts for Holistic Nootropics listeners and viewers. So if you are into going to a biohacking conference, if you think that's something you want to do, you can actually get 50% off your on-site or online ticket by visiting the biohacking or biohackingcongress.com. Use the promo code HACK50. I'll put that all in the description in the video and in the podcast player. Again, if you are a viewer of the podcast, just go to biohackingcongress.com, use the code HACK50, and you'll save 50% off of your on-site ticket. So you can go to the conference, save 50%, or you can just watch it from your computer at home. Or you can do both, however you want to live your life. It's Miami. Maybe you go out late one night, you can't make it the next morning. You can watch it right there in your hotel room or your Airbnb. And on top of that, I actually have a even more special deal for Holistic Nootropics listeners. I've got a handful of free tickets to actually go, to actually watch it from your computer. So you can attend virtually for free. I have free virtual tickets to this awesome conference. So if you would like a free ticket, I'm giving them away exclusively to the Holistic Nootropics listeners. All you got to do is go over to Apple Podcasts, leave the podcast a 5-star review, email me over at info@holisticnootropics.com, send me a screenshot of your review, and I will send you a free virtual ticket to the Biohacking Congress conference. Okay, so with all that out of the way, and again, that's a great deal for all of you listeners. Let's jump into the podcast today with Mark Young, who is a featured speaker over at the Biohacking Congress, which is very exciting. And we're very honored to have you with us, Mark. So let's jump into your story before we get into all the stuff about the Zona Plus. The Zona Plus is an interesting product. I've been researching it online. Actually seems very useful. And it's kind of in this realm of technology that I'm not so familiar with, which is like grip strength, which I've actually been hearing a lot about through the biohacking sphere. And it's pretty cool that you're involved with it. So before we actually jump into the science and all the benefits of the Zona Plus and the products and what you're doing over there at Zona Health, let's talk a little bit about your story. How did you go from, working with all of these tech startups and this kind of entrepreneurial background to getting into the health and wellness space? What was your drive? What was your motivation? What brought you to this point?
Well, first, Eric, let me say thank you so much for the invite. I always enjoy talking to people about what we're doing here at Zona Health, and certainly in the biohack space, it is something that I love. So no complaints about spending some time here with you today and talking to your audience about what we do as well. You asked a question about my background, what brought me to this point, and I will say, interestingly enough, I come from a background of higher education. So I was part of college and university education for years and years and years, college professor, so on, but also had a personal interest, obviously, in business. Would have been an entrepreneur my entire life and grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. But the health and wellness space, this biohack community, the Dave Asprey, bulletproof executive, all this stuff. Like, I was putting butter in my coffee long before most people. And so I've always loved the space and worked with plenty of tech startups in the past. And as I said, education has always been my go-to. It's what I love most. So when I get to speak to people and talk to them and educate them about stuff, I mean, I'm fully convinced that the world would be a better place if people just had the information that they need to do it. It's not that people are short of information in today's internet age. But I think they need taught about it. I think people need to have this type of information more accessible to them. Things about health, things about wellness, things about the minor things that they can do. So moving into the biohack space and dealing with tech startups and stuff like Zona Health is just a natural synergy for me. Like I love it because it combines everything I love personally in that health and wellness space, and is able to match that to my love for educating people on these kind of topics. So I love the combination. So yes, I get thrilled coming to work every day.
That's so cool. I mean, like, I find the biohacking space so interesting. Like, I really have this love-hate relationship with the whole space. I didn't intend myself to be, a biohacking personality or whatever. And to some extent, I can't stand the phrase biohacking. But on the other hand, I absolutely love it because it sums up exactly where we are in history, what the conditions are of, the modern health system and overall scenario. And really in the biohacking space, there's just so much innovation and so much imagination and so much science. And it's like an alchemy that all comes together. And then you start getting these cool products and things like we never thought about, like red light, for instance. Who would have known that one infrared beam could have so many positive effects on health. And then you have these other pieces of equipment like, your company, the Zona Plus, which focuses on something like grip strength. Like, who would have ever thought something like grip strength could be an indicator of longevity and of overall health? But when you start digging into the science of it, it seems to be a pretty strong indicator. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in there real quick, Eric. I'm
Sure.
going to say it's funny because we talk about all this innovation and this new thinking and this, you talk about all these new devices, and it's like, the truth of the matter is, it's one of the reasons why you hear the phrase the paleo diet, right? And, and I laugh and say, I eat pretty paleo anyways, but I'm a carnivore by nature. But the reality is that's not new. Like that's the funny thing is like all of the things that, you mentioned, I hate the word biohack, and, at the same time, I love it. And it's funny because it is overplayed now. So, if I take a multivitamin, I'm a biohacker now,
right?
which is not the case. But the reality is most of the things that you see in this space, they predate all of us. Most of the things that we're looking at is this realization, if I can use the word realization, but maybe an acceptance that the pharmacological world that we've grown up in was there's got to be a pill to solve the problem. And in fact, I would argue and say that this biohack community is going back into the pre-pharma world and saying the things that we all need to be healthy and the things that we all need to survive have existed for as long as the world itself, that the earth itself contained the things that we needed, that the human body is resilient above all things. And, the fact that you think about the fact that you cut your hand and it just goes back to normal in a period of time is absolutely mesmerizing to me every single time I think about it. You get a sunburn and in a couple of weeks, you're just back to normal. The body's ability to heal itself and to stabilize itself and to move itself back to a homeostatic level is just, it's mind blowing to me. So when we talk about all the innovation of biohacking and science and stuff like that, stuff's great. But the reality is most of it's just taken us back to where we were before we believed that pharmacology was the answer to everything. What is it that people would have told you prior to blood pressure medications? Prior to antihypertensives actually existing in pill form, what is it that people did to control such things as blood pressure? A lot of the stuff that we're telling them to do now. Well, are you dieting? Are you exercising? Are you cutting salt out of your diet? And I could go through the science behind all of those things, but they're not new. None of this stuff is new. And I would say that I almost believe that the pendulum started on one side, swung too far to the pharmacology world, and this biohack kind of community is, I would argue and say that it's almost as if we've put it back to normal. And I think this holistic approach to health isn't new. In fact, I would say that a lot of the stuff that you see even dates back to Eastern medicine, which goes way back. Further back than America itself. So the fact that we think we're leaders in medicine and innovation is maybe a little self-congratulatory, to be honest with you. But It's one of the things I love about what we do. And I know you keep mentioning grip strength as being something with the Zona Plus. And certainly the Zona Plus uses grip strength, but it's so far beyond just grip strength. It truthfully is this idea of isometric exercise. It's isometrics. We happen to use grip strength as the form of isometric. But isometric exercise, again, dates back so much further than what we're thinking about. But our world has us just in a different mind frame right now. So I love the biohack community because I think we're getting back to what we ought to be. It's not even that it's so much innovation right now. I mean, the idea that you need to have a certain amount of sunlight every day. News, you mentioned red light therapy and all the kind of stuff. Like, well, yeah, but didn't our ancestors all spend time in the sun? Like, wasn't that a thing?
Yeah.
and nowadays we're so busy caking on chemical sunblock and all this other kind of stuff that I was in Mexico a couple of weeks ago, and a friend of mine that was there was spraying on sunblock, and the boat captain came up and said, no, please don't spray on the sunblock. Not only is it not good for the boat because it sprays all over, but it gets in the water and it hurts the fish. And I'm like, then why are we putting this on ourselves? Like, why is it a thing? But yeah, I love that. I feel like biohacking it's a reset in a lot of ways. Like it's not as innovative as it's almost like a rediscovery of things that we've gotten away from over the last 100, 200 years.
Yeah. And it's interesting. As you're talking about this, I keep going to like your pendulum analysis, and it's so simple, but it speaks so much volume because you're right. We went not only in the pharmacological direction, I mean, 100,000%, but we also just at the same time completely lost connection to, I mean, real common sense, basic principles, like, hey, is it safe to put chemicals in your body that were also used in weapons during World War II? Right? Is it safe to put those chemicals on your skin to protect you from the sun when you then jump in the water and it kills all the fishes in the ocean? Right. Fair. So it's like, not only have we gone to the pharmacological side hardcore where there's a pill cure for every ailment, but we've just lost common sense with, so many just what you would think when you put it on paper is such, should be such basic knowledge. And I think that is the important part about biohacking, which is we have to come aggressive with this stuff. We have to say, yeah, you need sunlight. You need to work on isometric strength. You need to work on sleep. I know it's crazy. Nobody makes money off this stuff. The pharmaceutical companies are not going to tell you to get more sleep because that's going to help your blood pressure. They don't want you to know that. They want you to take the pill. So you're right. This is why biohacking is so important. And this is why the innovation is so important. And it's not innovation. It's just remembering how we're supposed to work as humans on the earth. But we do have to come with a little bit more, force and cool stuff and gadgets.
Right. And the thing is, it's a redesign of common sense in a lot of ways, or a redesign of what we already knew. I mean, certainly the technology behind the Zona Plus didn't exist 200 years ago. So the device itself would have, not happened had it not been for the technology of today. But the biohacking space, it's using that technology, using that innovation to reimagine, if you will, the common sense stuff, as you mentioned, from ages ago. I happen to go, and again, if I end up having a heart attack, please take me to an emergency room. I'm not anti-modern medicine. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that can be solved without it. And I'll tell you what, like I had a sinus issue with a mold allergy from was working in a building that had a lot of mold and stuff, and ended up with a terrible infection in my sinuses. And nothing I did. Every doctor in town, I'd seen multiple doctors. They'd given me prescription after prescription after prescription. Nothing was happening. Talked to a friend of mine who's a holistic doctor, and his wife, who's also a holistic doctor. She goes, let me tell you what to do. Take a neti pot, and I want you to put a teaspoon of baking soda in it. And I'm like, okay, like, sure, I'll try it. Best night's sleep I'd had in months.
Wow.
I'm like, baking soda.
Yeah.
Something as dumb as baking soda solved my problem. And I'm like, and I've taken so much medicine trying to solve this problem. And she's like, no, everything you're taking is just making it worse. Baking soda will kill the infection. You'll be fine. I'm like, so simple So simple.
Yeah.
And yet every doctor in town was so busy to pass out a prescription.
Classic example right there. Great example. So let's talk a little bit about isometric science and strength and how that works. Cause this is kind of a new, I feel like I've heard this phrase, just kind of being around the health and wellness community, listening to speakers speak about this, but I don't really know what it is. So maybe you can kind of clarify this idea of isometric strength and, why it's so important.
Sure. Do you want me to fully nerd out on you here, Eric?
Please do. Please do. The nerdier, the better.
Oh, perfect. So I'll start with just kind of explaining isometrics. That is, people already understand isometrics. They just don't know what it's called. And I'll give you the example and say isometric it's a plank, right? It's a plank. It's an air squat or a squat hold, you would call it. It's nothing more than holding a muscle group in a static level of resistance where you're not increasing or decreasing the resistance. So let me give you the example. A sit-up uses concentric and eccentric exercise. Concentric being where you constrict the muscle, so the up of a sit-up, and then eccentric when I actually go back down to my back, that's when I extend it. So I'm familiar with concentric, I'm familiar with eccentric. Everybody knows what a sit-up or a crunch is like. But eccentric is a plank. Why are planks so effective? Well, because you're holding a static level of resistance to a muscle group that for a short period of time, for most people, like you know what it's like to do a plank, I'm sure. You do a plank, first 20 seconds, you're like, yeah, whatever. I don't know why people complain about this, right? 30 seconds in and you're ready to collapse because it's just all of a sudden it gets hard. And what happens there is a lot of physiological reaction to that plank, if you will, but it builds that muscle group tremendously. It's like a wall sit if you're a gym nerd. The most basic motions are the ones that actually, it's like you don't need all the crazy equipment. You can actually use body weight exercise and it's just as effective. Do a wall sit, like put your knees at a 90 degrees, put your back against a wall, your quads will be falling apart in 30 seconds to a minute. It hurts. It's holding it at that static resistance that actually gives it, because you don't get the expansion and contraction. Now, let me switch that over to the Zona Plus, and I'll give you kind of the science behind that, why isometric works. In our case, we've developed the Zona Plus for the purpose of lowering blood pressure. That has actually been our purpose behind the design. That's been our science. That was our study. Our story, interestingly enough, I'll give you a quick history of the device and tell you the science behind it actually came from the U.S. military. There was a doctor back in the 80s who was actually hired to study why the fighter pilots would go into what we call G-force blackout. And that is when an aircraft moves at a certain speed, the pilot has a tendency to pass out. And that's normal because you hit that G-force, the pilot passes out, wakes back up. And they were trying to find ways that they could reduce the amount of time or stop the pilot from actually passing out during that study. So he was commissioned on a study with the U.S. Air Force, put his control group together, put all of his people together, studied the entire thing. And as most discoveries happen, after the study was over, one of the things that he noticed was that all of the pilots in the study that were being used for the purposes of studying this hypothesis all lowered their blood pressure. And he's like, well, that we weren't studying blood pressure. We were studying G-force blackout. What just happened? And his analysis was that they were doing studies on how tightly the pilot held the joystick, the grip that actually steers the plane. And he was making connections with the grip strength that they were using to squeeze the steering control of the plane to the fact that they all lowered blood pressure by the end of the study. So he spent the next 10, 15 years researching this and actually made a connection, which is where he came up with the fact that isometrics, which is that squeeze, actually ended up reducing blood pressure over time. So study after study and years after years, he figured out an exact algorithm for exactly what the grip strength needed to be, what the time difference needed to be, what the ons, the offs, the cadence, and everything else. And that's what we've managed to put into the Zona Plus. And again, the idea behind it that isometrics leads to blood pressure reduction, which we're currently in the midst of a full study with the FDA So we've got study after study that shows what it does, but now we're going for the full endorsement from the FDA. And once the FDA tells us that we have proven our point, it is fair game. And we're going to go flood the market and start educating people for how they can start using devices like this rather than antihypertensives and medications.
Wow, that is so cool. Now, have they ever done a study where they put something like grip strength, isometric exercise up against like a hypertensive drug?
So it's different. So the antihypertensive, this is what's interesting. So I'm going to say this. Antihypertensives are used for what I'll say an acute drop in blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is high right now, I can give you a pill and I can lower it by this afternoon. One of the big fears that a lot of people who live on antihypertensives have is if I live on an antihypertensive and I go on vacation and forget my medicine, I'm in a panic to make sure that I get replacement pills while I'm on vacation because I can't go a day without it. Because it's almost an artificial reduction, if you will. It's like taking a pain medication. Sure, I don't feel the pain anymore, but it doesn't mean that the injury is gone. And that's the problem with an antihypertensive. That is, I've lowered the blood pressure for now, but the minute I stop taking it, the blood pressure rises again. As an example, when I'm using a device like this, or I'm doing something to lower my blood pressure, so I'll say this is going to sound crazy. So if I were to diet and exercise my way to a healthy weight, the minute I have an ice cream sundae, I don't gain 40 pounds, right? Because I made a lifestyle change to bring it down. Using a device like this, you actually, you take down the body's physiological response to the high blood pressure. You lower the blood pressure in the body systemically so that if you don't take your Zona on vacation with you, it's no big deal. Your blood pressure is not going to spike up. You've trained your body to use its own resistance. So the body knows how to heal itself. Let me give you some of the science behind it if I can, and maybe that'll make a little bit more sense. So using isometric exercise, what ends up happening with the device, I'm going to walk you through the use of the Zona and then explain what's happening physiologically. That is, I squeeze the device as hard as I can, and it gives me a score and tells me how hard I squeezed it, pounds per square inch. Then I do it on my left hand. It does the same thing. Now, when I move it to right hand, it's going to have it has an internal algorithm that decides how much you should, which is only a percentage of your maximum voluntary contraction. So I squeeze it and it tells me how hard to squeeze it. On the screen, it tells me a little bit more, a little bit less, so on and so forth. And for 2 minutes, I hold it there in that exact position. Like that plank, maybe 30, 60 seconds in, all of a sudden it gets hard. I'm like, oh, wow, this is harder than I thought it was, right? Because your body tends to let go as things get to be harder. I mean, your body tends to relax. So you got to hold it at that 2 minutes. Physiologically, what's happening on the inside is that your brain says something's wrong. My arm is in danger. This hurts. Why would I voluntarily make myself hurt? And just as you know, if you're doing a plank, your first reaction is to put your knees to the ground, right? I want to be done with this. But your brain is starting to do something, and it goes into what's called that fight or flight kind of mentality. I've hit that parasympathetic response. What's happening at that point is your brain's like, okay, I need to get something going on here. It's almost as if my arm is in a tourniquet. And because of that, your brain believes that the body has low blood flow to the arm, which is true. It's constrained. What the brain does is it actually triggers the production of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide floods your entire system. Nitric oxide, as you may know, is a vasodilator. And what I mean by vasodilator is it opens up the blood vessels in the body throughout the body. So nitric oxide is released, vasodilation takes place. When vasodilation takes place, blood flows more freely. Your arm gets the blood that it needed. Well, by about the time that happens, the 2 minutes are up and I let go of the device anyways. But it's very common for a person to kind of shake their hand a little bit because you want to put blood back in it. That's a very normal response. Like if your foot fell asleep, you'd shake it a little bit, get the blood flow moving. Then you do that on your left hand, then your right, then your left. Now, physiologically, I'll say that there's another layer of things going on there. It's not just the release of nitric oxide, but this is where I get into the systemic side. And you told me to nerd out, so I'm nerding out with you. And that is, in each of your blood vessels are actually lined with what's called the endothelium. And the endothelium is like a sponge on the inside. And the endothelium is actually a regulator in your body that can regulate blood pressure. So if the pressure is too high, imagine that it's like a thermostat that's measuring the temperature. And when the temperature gets to a certain level, it turns off the furnace. It's like, okay, we're hot enough, we're good. The same way the endothelium actually measures blood pressure. It says how much pressure is going through the system. Over time, and it just happens with age, the endothelium is like a sponge, and it actually begins to harden. So, it's hardening of the arteries, right? It's why older people tend to have higher blood pressure than younger people. So that endothelium begins to harden over time. And as it hardens, it loses its ability to tell if the blood pressure is high or not. So your blood pressure raises simply because your body loses its ability to realize that your blood pressure raised. So your blood pressure went up because your body can't tell it went up anymore. It's like that frog that sits in the boiling water and eventually just dies because it's such slow movement. The same thing happens with your blood pressure. When you're using isometric exercise of any sort, really, what happens is that resistance, the body's reaction, is that the cell actually squeezes. And whether or not you know this, there's an equal amount of sodium and potassium in every cell. And those sodium and potassium levels must remain equal at all times. Well, the only thing that softens the endothelium is potassium. So we need to figure out a way to push potassium into the bloodstream. Well, how do I get potassium into the bloodstream? Well, the only way to make potassium go out of the blood is to push sodium out. So isometrics will actually push sodium out of the cell. Now the sodium level went down. The only way to maintain that homeostasis is for potassium to go down also. So the cell now pushes potassium out, which is released into the endothelium. The endothelium softens. When the endothelium softens, and again, I'm using some basic terms here, but the endothelium softens and goes, oh no, our blood pressure is too high. When the endothelium sees that the blood pressure is too high and regulates this, what does it do? It releases nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator. Once the blood vessels dilate, the pressure goes down because it's like a garden hose. The wider it is, the less powerful the stream. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best explanation of blood pressure. Like the most scientific, simplistic explanation of blood pressure I've ever heard. So you should go on a lecture.
It's probably the best word.
Yeah. You should definitely start a YouTube channel and teach young medical students about blood pressure. That was great.
I don't know about that.
But no, that's actually really interesting to know because, yeah, you're right. I do planks. And now that I think about it, I do all these isometric exercises. I didn't know they were isometric. I just kind of gathered them along with like just being at the gym for a while and go, hey, I'm going to do a plank. I'm going to do a wall sit. I'm going to do this and that. And yeah, for the first 20 seconds, it's fine. And then you start to feel that pain come in. And I had no idea that it was actually more than just building muscle or strengthening, my core or whatever. It was actually physiologically changing how my blood vessels work. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. And what's cool about a device like this is that, as I say, doing planks, doing wall sits, obviously isometrics is an incredible way to gain muscle mass. I mean, it's a great exercise no matter what you're doing with it. What's cool about the Zona Plus specifically is that with the Zona Plus, we've measured it out. I mean, because again, our goal is not muscle gain. Our goal is blood pressure reduction. Mm-hmm. So it's like what we've done is use the science. I mean, the isometrics is, again, that biohack kind of thing. This is what we're using. This is something your body naturally does. All we're doing is putting your body back to the way it should be. So using this type of technology, using this algorithm, using what we figured out to be the perfect amount of pressure, the perfect amount of time, we're just helping your body get back to where it was. Like, we didn't make your blood pressure go down unnaturally. What we did is we hacked into your body releasing potassium.
Yeah.
And by hacking the potassium release, your blood pressure is going to go down, because of the endothelium, because of the sodium release, because of the nitric oxide production, because of all of those things. Now your blood pressure goes down. So there's like all these steps. It's not squeeze this and your blood pressure goes down. It's your body is such a phenomenally engineered organism. And all we're doing is it's that whole, if I poke your foot with a needle, you're going to twitch in your eye, right? It's all of these things are connected.
Mm-hmm. And this would be something I could see working as an amazing tool for people who they're not the gym rats, they're not the biohackers, they're just somebody who goes to the doctor. The doctor says your blood pressure's high, or you need to lose some weight, or, even to the extent of you maybe, and I'm not making any medical claims here by any means,
Right.
but maybe you're pre-diabetic or you have blood sugar regulation issues, because a lot of times, metabolism is highly dependent on that sodium potassium interchange. And if you're able to literally hack your cells to physically give you more potassium, because a lot of these people who have health problems, they don't get enough potassium in their diet. This is an incredible tool. I actually am very impressed by it.
And what's cool about it is that, for instance, and I'll tell you, I use my Zona, obviously. I had an episode, my blood pressure, I was a runner. My blood pressure was always solid 110/72, like most of my adult life. And then a couple of years ago, it just spiked. And it was at that point that I'm like, okay, the rubber hit the road here. Like, now it's me. I'm 149/92.
Wow.
Like, what in the world? Like, out of nowhere. I had no explanation for it. I'm like, all right, I'm telling everybody else what they need to do to lower their blood pressure, but now it's on me. Am I going to do the same thing? And I'm like, well, don't be a hypocrite. And I went and got a Zona from our manufacturing warehouse, and I started using it. What's funny is, like, in a number of weeks, which is what it takes, normally for most people, it's about 6 to 8 weeks before they really see the results. So you really got to commit. I'd say we'd say 5 times per week, using it 5 times per week. It's a total of just under 12 minutes per day. And I committed. I left it sitting by my computer, and it's easy enough to do. Some people struggle with it at first because it's a new movement. I can check my email while I'm doing it. That's like, it becomes that second nature to just use it. And I'm replying to emails with one hand, and when I have to switch hands, I start typing with the other hand. And it's just that easy to use. And at the same time, as soon as I noticed that there was a problem, I've got another supplement here on my desk called Nitric Boost. It's from another partner that we work with called Vitalia Life. And the Vitalia Nitric Boost, I love also because, much like I told you, the pharmacology is that I'm going to immediately give you, an antihypertensive that's going to lower the blood pressure immediately, versus this is going to hack my system over time. So this is kind of more of the long game. But when I started taking this, it went down anyways, because I take this on a daily basis. So this is a nitric oxide product. I take nitric oxide, lowers it quickly. This lowers it over time. Mm-hmm. So it's like the combination of both is incredible. And plus taking the nitric oxide, it's an energy level boost. It's just, overall better circulation and anything related to that. It's, again, that's what Zona is really doing. It's releasing nitric oxide into the system.
And just to give it another layer here, what just my experience working with people and doing these podcasts and just kind of interacting in this space for a little while, people underestimate how important, I shouldn't say they underestimate, but when you do something like this, where you naturally lower your blood pressure without taking a pharmaceutical drug that has all these side effects that are 100% going to add a burden to, at the very least, your liver, which affects your blood sugar, which affects your blood pressure, all this stuff. When you're doing this, you start to have all of these residual side effects that are good. When you naturally lower your blood pressure, okay, well, your sleep's going to be better. Your stress is going to be lower. Your mood's going to be better. You're not going to have as much cortisol pumping because you're not in sympathetic nervous system as much. So you're going to be much more calm, much more reasonable. Your brain's going to be sharper. Your workouts are going to be better. You're going to just feel better. And
I laughed. I was a guest on Dave Asprey's podcast last year, the year before, whatever. And Dave and I were talking, and Dave goes, I need to ask you. He goes, increased nitric oxide leads to increased circulation. Does this affect ED? And I laughed. I'm like, well, I hope you're not asking this personally, but the answer to that is yes. Stuff that you could completely unrelated to what you're trying to solve improves. So I'm like, well, sure, it's related to circulation. Of course, that's going to be impacted as well. So yes, you're right. Like some of the brain fog, all of these things go away. And as you mentioned, you get on pharmaceuticals, and it's the side effects. It's the coughing. It's the dry mouth. It's the sleeplessness. It's the frequent urination. Like all of the side effects that people are freaked out. It's like sometimes I'm like, man, like the solution is worse than the problem. I'd rather just deal with the problem.
Yeah. And then, when you go down that pharmaceutical road, it's like, you don't just get one. Oh no, the system is set up to make sure that you're a customer for life, and you are constantly spending money. So, your blood pressure drugs, go ahead. Sorry.
It's exactly the point you're saying. It's like, if I broke my leg and I never actually fixed the break, I'm walking around on a broken leg. So it's like, okay, so I'm walking around on the broken leg, and now what happens? Well, I'm going to get a second break because now my system, I never fixed the problem. And that's what happens with these pharmaceuticals. You don't fix the problem. All you do is mask the symptom.
Yeah.
So I'm on pain meds so that I don't feel my broken leg. Well, now I have 2 breaks. Now I'm on double the pain meds because now I'm walking around with 2 breaks in my leg.
Right.
Because I never fixed the break. Right.
And with these pharmaceuticals, specifically, it's like you get on the blood pressure medication, that's going to have a side effect. Well, now you need, now you're going to have sleeplessness or insomnia. Okay, well, now you need a pill for that. Insomnia. Okay, well, now you've got constipation. Okay, well, now you got a pill for that. And then now the constipation makes you a little, makes you sad. So now you got an antidepressant. And then it just goes on and on and on. And it's like, man, if you are the type of person that, you're starting to go down that road, or you're deep in that road, or you even just somebody who's like, I like to do things naturally. To me, an isometric exercise like the Zona Plus, just give it a try. Like your lifetime cost that's going to cost you versus the amount of money you're going to spend on the drugs, the headache with insurance, and then the more drugs, and then the compounding health problems, the amount of time lost going to the doctor, blah, 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 on and on. I mean, man, at the very least, it's pretty much scientifically proven to work. I'm not making any medical claims. I know you're in FDA clinical trials as we speak, but, look through the data, and it looks like this thing actually does help your blood pressure. And at the very least, if you get a drop in blood pressure, mission accomplished. And if you don't, you didn't hurt yourself at all.
I won't get political, but I will say, I want to hear anybody stand on a stage on television and tell people we need to diet and exercise if we want to be healthy. Like, these aren't secrets. Like, when over the last year and a half has anybody just gotten up and promoted healthy lifestyle? And that was one of my biggest issues, a year and a half ago. I'm like, I get it. We've got things going on in the world that are unprecedented in our lifetimes. But at the same time, we closed the gyms and we left McDonald's open.
Yeah. Classic example.
I have a problem with that. Mm-hmm. It's like we closed the gyms and left McDonald's open. And it's like this biohack community, this, going back to where we started, this whole idea that we're going to, go back to where it is that we should have been. Like, this movement needs to start becoming commonplace. It's a common sense. Like I said before, it's like we're just putting the body back to where it should have been. But we can't go out. I live in South Florida, so I have to be honest with you. We haven't been entirely affected.
Yeah.
Because nobody down here knows that anything happened.
Right.
But the reality is like, people are being restricted from going out and getting sunlight by laying on the beach, but I can go to McDonald's. Mm-hmm. Like, what is it we're doing? It's like we've gotten away from some of the common sense. And I don't mean based on, government restriction. I mean, just people in general. Yeah. People in general have gotten away from just the obvious things that they can do to deal with their health. So I love being in the space, working with a company like Zona Health and bringing practical solutions to things, keeping people off of pharmacology as much as possible, and really providing people the opportunity and the tools to hack their own body's natural resistance. Your body was made to live, which is why the body is such an incredible organism. Like I said, you cut your hand and it's back to normal in a couple of days. Like, we're phenomenal in the way that our bodies are able to heal themselves. Sometimes we just need to put a little effort into figuring out how to make it heal better. Yeah. And that's what we've done. We've used technology to be able to hack the body's ability to regulate its own blood pressure. Yeah. Which I love that.
And you hit on something, a very interesting word. It's a practical solution. And I think that's the part that's missing from the health and wellness conversation at a basic level, because, you go to your doctor and they see your blood pressure's high. They'll go, well, you need to diet and exercise. and they just leave you at that. Maybe they'll not prescribe you, but they'll recommend like a multivitamin, which, you know, in a lot of cases, like Centrum 100, and it's garbage. Yeah.
Useless.
Completely useless. But, you know, when you give somebody an actual tool, because I think that's where the pharmaceuticals win the battle of the minds, where you go, well, we have a pill that's going to bring your blood pressure down. Okay, I'll take that. I don't got time for multivitamins and all this, you know, exercise stuff. But see, what you're coming with is you're coming with a tool that essentially mimics a pharmaceutical, and you say, just do this. Just squeeze this thing with your hand for 12 minutes a day, and you should see some success with it. And a person goes, yeah, that's an actual practical thing that I can literally wrap my hand around and use. And that's what people need. They don't need the, you know, the generic diet and exercise, because most people can't do that. But when you give them an actual tool, and that's what's great about the biohacking community, because God knows there's plenty of tools in this space, then you start to really affect change in the common person.
And what's crazy in that, Eric, is that I'm kind of laughing because I'll say we are so conditioned that a practical solution that requires a change in diet or a change in exercise pattern or something like that is the second thing that we go to. The fact that we have to convince people that something like, I mean, they look at something like Zona, and the biggest skepticism we get is people, yeah, but does it really work? Like, well, sure it works, and we can show you clinically how it works, but when the doctor prescribed the medication to you, did you ask the doctor, yeah, but does it really work? Like, no, you never asked that question. You just took the pill. Because we're just so conditioned as a society to just take the pill and things get better. But when someone's provided a tool, a practical solution, it's people who've moved to gluten-free diets. I tend to eat very gluten-free. My body doesn't respond well to it. It's like, it's amazing the freedom that you feel from it. And it's like, but just that, does that really do that though? I don't know. And it's like, but we'll gladly take a pill.
Yeah.
And it's just, we're just so conditioned as a society that that's what it is. And it's this whole idea. I was talking with a friend recently. We were talking about the idea that we call it healthcare, when in fact, I don't believe there's anything healthcare about our healthcare system. It's sick care.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not caring for people's health. We're caring for people's sicknesses, because we're not doing anything to teach people how to actually live healthy. And that's when I will say, and I don't blame the system for that. It's individuals that need to take responsibility for their own health and understand that your life is yours. And if it doesn't work out, you're the only one that pays the price for that. Like, you take responsibility for your health, because if the doctor's wrong, he still lives, not you.
Yeah.
Like, you are responsible for your health. You are responsible for your wellness. You're responsible for the side effects. You're responsible for the things you put in, and the things you do with your body. And my gosh, if I had anything to say to anybody, it's like, your body is such a gift and you only get one of them. Like, treat it well.
100%. Now, we're getting close to the end here, but I did want to ask you, because it looks like you got a ring there on your finger. Is that an Oura ring?
It is.
So I wanted to ask you, because I'm an Oura ring, wearer myself. Have you noticed any differences in your sleep data since using the Zona Plus?
So I've used the Zona Plus for a number of years before I've been using the Oura ring. So I've used the Zona longer than I've used the Oura ring. So I've not noticed a difference specifically, but what I will say is that when I am using the Zona Plus, some of the minor things that I will tell you that I do notice, obviously my blood pressure is under control now, which is a relief. The other thing I will say, and that is, I do find when I'm using the Zona Plus, because it does nitric oxide release, that's the predominant thing, that the Zona Plus ultimately leads to the production of nitric oxide, that vasodilator. When I use the Zona Plus, I will notice that my workouts, I'm a HIIT train guy, so like I'm that high intensity workout routine. I will notice that my workouts are better and my recovery is faster. And again, because nitric oxide production will heal muscle tissue. Most people don't realize that, in order to build big muscles, pretty much you're destroying them in the process. That they only get bigger in the healing, not in the tearing them down. So it's like when I'm working out, I will have better muscle recovery. I will have better, stronger workouts during that time. So I do notice that kind of stuff. Sleep, not specifically, no.
Got you. Yeah, I would love to see some kind of data on, the Zona Plus and heart rate variability, for instance, because it almost sounds like something that could be useful for that.
Interesting that you mentioned HRV, because that is actually something that I do monitor with my Oura Ring. And that is my HRV is typically not very high, which I hate. And I've tried to hack everything to try to increase it. And pretty much all the specialists I've talked to have just been like, some people just don't have a high HRV. It's not that big of a deal. But one of the things is I'm familiar with the organization HeartMath.
No.
Okay, they're big into heart rate variability studies and whatnot. And they actually had started using the Zona Plus because it requires a certain amount of concentration. But one of the things with heart rate variability, obviously, as you know, is recovery time. And what they'll do is they'll take people and they'll stimulate them, and then they try to bring them down. But there's both active and passive meditation, if you will. And for some folks, they can just quiet and they can calm themselves and they can bring that heart rate back down just based on, meditation, if you will. There's other people that are more active in the way that they do that, because people like me who tend to be high energy, the thought of just sitting and meditating just probably raises my blood pressure. But what they'll do is they've actually been using Zona because you have to hold it at a certain level. You have to, that exact squeeze, and it'll tell you more, it'll tell you less. So if you do, so it requires a certain amount of concentration for the user. And what they found is that it's almost like a video game to some of them. That is, it calms them because they have to stay active with it, with the concentrating on exactly the level they hold it at. So because of that, they're using it for more of the active meditation to bring people's heart rates down after being stimulated.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
It's kind of cool to think about it, because we ran into someone at a biohack conference from there, and she's like, this is crazy. Like, I'm going to introduce this. And then the conversation went from there. But I thought that was really kind of an interesting use for it. We've had everybody from child psychologists who use it when they get children, when they get patients in their clinics that end up, I would say, I don't want to say they're misbehaving, if you will. Like they get overly active during the therapy. They get triggered somehow through therapy. They've used it to bring them back down. Because, okay, well, that's great. I'm really excited. Like you're not excited right now. You're not in a manic stage. That's great. Well, show me that you can use this. And then the child takes it, and then the child has to focus on what's going on there to prove the point that they're fine. And in doing so, it de-escalates.
Yeah.
So just interesting uses for a tool that was never intended to be those things, right?
Yeah. And, people in the biohacking community always looking for a new way to meditate.
Always.
So that's pretty
always
solid.
Something new.
So, well, Mark, this has been a really fun conversation. I've definitely learned a lot. I know the viewer or listener is definitely probably taking some interesting points home with them. Now, if somebody was interested in learning more about the Zona Plus, or interested in purchasing one, or learning more about you and your organization, where would be a good place for that person to go?
Yeah, I'll tell you, go visit our website. You can learn more about isometric exercise and see some of the other things that we've got going on there. It's at zona.com, and I'm looking up right now because I think our team put out a special coupon code for your listeners also. So zona.com, and if they wanted to use the coupon code, I just had it earlier this morning, Eric. Did you get it?
Yeah, I think it's holistic.
I think the coupon code is holistic, and they go to zona.com, and if they use coupon code holistic, HOLISTIC, it actually gives them $50 off. So I do encourage people to go there, use that coupon code, again, holistic, HOLISTIC, and they'll get $50 off the price of the device. Use it. We do have a 90-day money-back guarantee. So I tell people, you're not out anything if it doesn't work. And if it does work, you've saved yourself a fortune over a lifetime in blood pressure medications. But, in the biohack world, man, like, we love gadgets, don't we? Funny enough that you noticed the Oura ring on my hand during the middle of the podcast.
Yeah, I spot those things everywhere, and I just want to know everything about that person's like deep sleep, REM sleep. I want to know it all.
It's true. We actually recently started a partnership. Are you familiar with Heads Up Health?
No.
Take a look at it. Heads Up Health is actually you'll love it. It's a full dashboard suite that uses all sorts of biofeedback devices and puts all of your health information into a dashboard where you actually get to manipulate each of the widgets and tiles and see what it is that you want to see and so on. It's an amazing suite. Zona just partnered with Heads Up. So all of your Zona data shows up on your Heads Up dashboard also. So you can track your blood pressure. You can track everything from your Aura Ring. Will show up right on your Heads Up suite. So yeah, check that out too, Eric. I think you'd love it.
Yeah. And I'm sure the people listening, because we got some big time health nerds listening to this podcast. So that's a really cool resource. Well, cool, Mark. This is great. It's been a great chat. I've learned a lot. And viewer, listener, if you are interested in the Zona Plus, learning more, head on over to, is it zonahealth.com?
Zona.com. Zona.
Zona.com. Check out the Zona Plus, check out the nitric oxide products, and just peruse the science because there's so much there. Check out the other websites that Mark threw out here. And in the meantime, enjoy your life, live your life to the fullest, and we will catch you on the next podcast. Thanks so much for watching. Peace.
Thanks for listening. For more brain-boosting info, in-depth articles, and show notes, check out holisticnootropics.com.